How far would you go to see your child become king? Would you lie? Would you betray? Would you kill? In the 16th century, inside the golden walls of the Ottoman Empire, there was one woman who did all of that and more. Her name was Hurrem Sultan. She began as a slave, captured, sold, forgotten. But she didn't stay forgotten for long. With beauty as her weapon and ambition as her shield, Hurrem climbed her way into the heart of the Sultan. And once she got there, she started a game no one else dared to play. A game of power, a game of blood. And at the center of it was a boy, her son, the one she would burn an empire for. Stay with me, because this is the story of how a mother rewrote history, one deadly move at a time. They say the most dangerous place in the Ottoman Empire wasn't the battlefield, it was the palace, behind the silk curtains of Topkapi, behind the golden gates of imperial luxury, lived a world ruled by women, the harem. And inside that world, the real wars were fought with whispers, alliances, and bloodlines. When Hurrem first arrived, she was nothing, a captured slave, a foreigner, stripped of her past, renamed, and thrown into a world where survival meant obedience. But Hurrem didn't obey. She studied, she waited, she smiled, and soon she became more than just another concubine. She became the concubine, the Sultan's favorite, his obsession, his love. And with that love came enemies, because there was someone else. Mahidevran, Suleiman's longtime consort, the mother of his firstborn son, Prince Mustafa. Mahidevran had always believed the throne would one day belong to her son. It was written, it was certain, until the red-haired girl from Ruthenia started changing everything. Hurrem didn't just gain Suleiman's heart, she gained influence. She began bearing sons, one after another, each one a potential heir. And in the world of Ottoman succession, there could only be one. The rules were brutal, and everyone knew it. Only one prince would survive to become sultan. The others? They would be eliminated. So when Hurrem gave birth to Mehmed, then Selim, then Bayezid, the stakes skyrocketed, because now there wasn't just one heir. There were many. And the mothers of those heirs? They became enemies by blood. This wasn't about love anymore. This was war. Hurrem, once a slave, now found herself locked in a deadly rivalry with Mahidevran, a woman who had everything to lose. Both mothers, both determined, both watching every move, every whisper, every nod from a sultan. Because the moment Suleiman showed favor to one prince, or one mother, that was the moment the rest of them would fall. And so, the palace, this place of beauty, poetry, and devotion, became a minefield. Behind every gift was a message. Behind every smile a threat. Behind every child a claim to the throne. And Hurrem? She wasn't playing just to survive anymore. She was playing to win. Not for herself, but for her sons. For the future she believed only she could shape. And as the rivalry deepened, the blood of women began to shape the bloodline of emperors. Power always has a price. And in the Ottoman Empire, that price was paid in blood. By the time Hurrem had given birth to 4 sons, the palace was no longer just a home. It was a chessboard, and every child was a piece. The favorite? Prince Mustafa, Mahidevran's son. He was strong, charismatic, a born leader. The army loved him. The people adored him. Even Suleiman himself seemed to see his younger self in Mustafa. To most, it was obvious Mustafa would be sultan. But to Hurrem, that was a problem. Because in the Ottoman world, there could never be 2 heirs. When one prince ascended the throne, his brothers, all of them, were executed. It was not cruelty. It was law. And for Hurrem, it was personal. She wasn't just fighting for power anymore. She was fighting for the survival of her sons. And the clock was ticking. Every time Suleiman visited Mustafa, every time the court whispered his name, Hurrem knew, if she didn't act, her children would die. So she began to act, quietly, strategically, and with terrifying precision. First, she created distance. She convinced Suleiman to move her and their children into the main palace, closer to the center of power and farther from Mahidevran. Then she began to isolate Mustafa. Rumors started to spread, that he was arrogant, that he questioned his father, that he was too ambitious, too dangerous. Where did those rumors come from? No one could say for sure, but they always seemed to benefit Hurrem. And then something happened that changed everything. Hurrem did what no concubine had ever done before. She married the Sultan. Legally, officially, before God and the empire. A slave had become the queen. It shocked the court, outraged the elite, but it sealed Hurrem's place at the center of power. Now, she was no longer just the Sultan's lover. She was his wife, and the mother of his legitimate heirs. And that legitimacy changed the game, because now the question wasn't if one of her sons would rule. It was which one. But even then, one obstacle remained: Mustafa. The empire still saw him as the natural heir. And as long as he lived, none of Hurrem's sons were safe. So she made her next move. She aligned herself with Rustam Pasha, her son-in-law, and one of Suleiman's most trusted advisors. Rustam was loyal, intelligent, and ruthless. With him, Hurrem had eyes and influence in the council. And soon letters began to surface. Letters allegedly written by Mustafa to the Shah of Persia, enemies of the Ottoman Empire. In these letters, Mustafa appeared to be plotting against his father, planning a rebellion, preparing to seize the throne. No one could prove the letters were real. Some say they were forged. Some say they were planted. But the damage was done. Suleiman, the great lawgiver, had to choose between love for his son and loyalty to the empire. And on a quiet day in the year 1553, as the army camped in Persia, Mustafa was summoned to his father's tent. He entered proud, calm, unaware, and he never came out, strangled with a silk cord, the method reserved for royal blood. A prince, a warrior, the favorite, dead, and behind that death was a mother's hand. Hurrem wasn't there. She didn't give the order. She didn't even whisper his name. But everyone knew. Without her, it never would have happened. The path was now clear. Her sons, no longer hunted, no longer threatened. The throne was within reach. But the blood that cleared the way was still on the floor. And Hurrem? She had won. But at what cost? Mustafa was gone. The empire fell silent. And Hurrem had what she wanted. Or so it seemed. Because as one son fell, another war began. This time, not with rivals outside, but from within her own blood. Hurrem had 4 sons, but the 2 strongest were Mehmed and Bayezid. Mehmed calm, intelligent, diplomatic. Bayezid fiery, bold, impulsive. Both ambitious. Both loved by the people. Both groomed to lead. And then there was Selim. Quiet, calculating. Not a fighter, not a general, but patient, dangerously so. Hurrem had once dreamed of unity, that her sons would support each other, rule together. But the empire had no space for brotherhood. Only one throne, only one survivor. And as time passed, that ugly truth became clearer. Because after Mustafa's death, no one felt safe anymore. Not even Hurrem. The people began to whisper that Mustafa had been innocent, that the Sultan had been deceived, that Hurrem was the real traitor. Support for Bayezid began to grow. He was young, strong, resentful of the system that took his brother. He questioned the old ways. And worst of all, he defied his father. Selim, meanwhile, stayed quiet. He drank, he watched, and he waited. Then in 1543, Mehmed, Hurrem's favorite son, died suddenly of smallpox. He was only 21. It broke her. For weeks, she disappeared from court life. Her letters stopped. Her voice fell silent. And when she returned, she was different, colder, more focused. Because now, only 2 sons remained, Bayezid and Selim. And deep inside she knew one of them would have to die. Bayezid was strong, but reckless. He disobeyed orders, challenged governors, wrote letters Hurrem begged him not to send. Selim was the opposite, submissive, clever, always working through others. Suleiman grew tired of Bayezid's rebellion. He began to favor Selim, the quieter threat. And Hurrem had to choose. She pleaded with Bayezid, "Obey your father. Step back. Live." But he wouldn't listen. Bayezid began preparing troops. He believed he was defending himself. But the court saw something else. Treason. And Hurrem knew once again. A prince was walking toward his own death. She begged Suleiman to show mercy. She sent letters. She even offered to go to Bayezid herself. But it was too late. In 1559, Bayezid was captured after a failed rebellion. He and his 4 sons were executed, strangled. Like Mustafa, a second son, gone. Hurrem didn't live to see it. She died the year before, in 1558, sick, weakened, but not defeated, because the son who remained was the one who would wear the crown. Selim II, the first son of a slave queen to rule the Ottoman Empire. And behind that moment, behind the silken ceremony, was a trail of letters, tears, and blood. Hurrem had won, but at what cost? 2 sons dead, a legacy feared and admired in equal measure. She didn't live to see the throne, but she had built the road to it, with precision, pain, and ruthless love. They called her a poisoner, a witch, a traitor. But in truth, she was something far more dangerous. A mother with a plan. And no one, not even her sons, could escape it. Selim too became sultan, but there were no songs, no great victories, no fire in his eyes. They called him Selim the Sot, the drunkard, a man more interested in wine than war, poetry than politics. He ruled because his mother had cleared the path, but the path was soaked in blood. Mustafa, Mehmed, Bayezid, gone, each one a threat, each one a sacrifice. And so, for the first time in Ottoman history, a sultan sat on the throne, not because he earned it, but because his mother made it so. Hurrem Sultan never wore a crown. She never held a sword. But she changed the empire forever. She reshaped the rules of power, not through violence, but through strategy. Not by being feared, but by being indispensable. She built schools, mosques, soup kitchens. She advised the sultan in matters of state. And she turned the harem, once a prison, into a political machine. They whispered her name with awe and with terror. She poisoned rivals. She seduced the sultan. She destroyed the royal bloodline. But the truth? Hurrem was a survivor, a slave who refused to stay silent, a mother who knew that in a man's world, love alone wasn't enough. She needed power, and she got it at any cost. She died in 1558, buried beside Suleiman, the only woman to ever lie next to a sultan in the imperial tomb. Even in death, she defied tradition. And yet, history never stopped debating her legacy. Was she a schemer? Or a visionary? Was she a villain? Or simply a woman who refused to lose? For centuries, male historians painted her as dangerous, manipulative, evil. But today, women look at her differently, as a symbol of agency, of resilience, of feminine power in a world that denied it. Because Hurrem didn't just fight for her sons. She fought for her place in a world that told her she had none. And she won. But history always asks, at what cost? She built an empire from behind a curtain. She shaped generations with a whisper. She lost 2 sons and gave one a crown. And in doing so, Hurrem Sultan became immortal. She changed history from behind a veil. But Hurrem Sultan was not the only woman to bend empires to her will. Her daughter, Miraima, was just as brilliant and just as ruthless. Want to know how she became the Shadow Queen after her mother's death? Backhand index pointing right, click here to watch. Miraima, the princess who ruled without a throne. If this story kept you watching until the end, hit the like button to support more forgotten tales of powerful women. Speech balloon, tell us in the comments. Was Hurrem a villain, or just a mother doing what she had to do? And don't forget to subscribe, because next week, we reveal the secret that almost tore Miraima and her father apart.